All right, listen up. You ever walk into a room and feel everything, not just your emotions, but everyone else's too? Like you've got this internal radar that's always scanning, always picking up on vibes, on pain, joy, lies, truth. That's not weakness. That's your superpower. But here's the twist. What happens when that person, the super empath, crosses paths with a narcissist? We've been told the empath is the victim, the one who gets drained, manipulated, destroyed. But that's only half the story. Because when a super empath wakes up, when they start seeing clearly, they become the narcissist's worst nightmare. Today, I'm not just going to talk about emotional warfare. I'm going to break down what happens when the person who's wired to heal decides it's time to stop playing nice. This isn't about revenge. It's about reclaiming power. And by the time we're done, you'll never look at your sensitivity the same way again. The moment a super empath becomes aware, truly aware, is the moment everything changes. For so long, they've been moving through life absorbing pain that wasn't theirs, questioning their worth, and wondering why relationships feel so one-sided. The narcissist thrives in that fog, that confusion. They count on the empath not seeing the manipulation for what it is. They use charm, gaslighting, and control to keep the empath second-guessing everything, even their own intuition. But when an empath starts to wake up, it's not some quiet, gradual thing. It's a snap, a shift. Something clicks, and suddenly the empath starts seeing through the game. They stop blaming themselves. They stop making excuses for the narcissist behavior. They start putting words to what they've been feeling for years. Words like toxic, manipulation, emotional abuse. This awareness doesn't just bring clarity, it brings fire. Because once the empath sees the pattern, they can't unsee it. They stop focusing on what's wrong with them and start noticing what's wrong with the dynamic. And let me tell you, narcissists hate that. Because the moment the empath steps into awareness, they stop feeding the narcissist's ego. They stop reacting the way they used to. They don't break down or apologize for things. They get calm, cold, focused. That emotional chaos the narcissist used to stir up, it doesn't work anymore. The buttons don't push the same way. That's the beginning of the end for the narcissist's control. Awareness gives the empath their vision back. They start seeing the patterns in other areas of life too, not just with the narcissist, but in work, friendships, even family. They start drawing connections, seeing how long this pattern has been playing out, and realizing they were never too sensitive. They were surrounded by people who never deserved access to that sensitivity in the first place. It's like going from black and white to color, from surviving to strategizing. The empath starts to observe rather than absorb. They begin to detach emotionally, not out of spite, but out of clarity. That's when the narcissist starts to feel the shift, and trust me, they feel it hard, because the power dynamic begins to tilt. And they know it. This is where the game starts to flit. The narcissist who once held all the cards starts panicking because they can't control someone who's no longer confused. They can't manipulate someone who knows exactly what's going on. Awareness strips the narcissist of their biggest weapon, the empath's doubt. Now the empath is showing up different, less reactive, more grounded, silent when they used to argue, smiling when they used to cry. That terrifies the narcissist. They start acting out, pushing harder, trying to trigger the old responses, but it doesn't work because awareness is armor. And once the empath puts it on, they're not just protected, they're powerful. Boundaries are the line in the sand where the empath finally says, no more. And for a narcissist, that's like poison. See, the empath has spent so much of their life open energetically, emotionally, physically, always giving, always saying yes, always putting someone else's comfort above their own. That's what makes them so attractive to a narcissist in the first place. Narcissists crave supply, validation, admiration, attention, and the empath gives it without being until they don't. Until one day the empath starts drawing boundaries, not out of anger, but out of self-respect. And that's when everything shifts. A narcissist isn't used to boundaries. They're used to access. They want to be able to call at midnight and get an answer. They want to say something cruel and have the empath apologize. They expect to take, and they've been doing it for so long that they believe it's their right. So the first time the empath says no, or I need space, or that's not okay with me, the narcissist doesn't know what to do. They'll push harder, they'll guilt trip, they'll use every tactic in the book, anger, silence, love bombing, to try to pull the empath back into submission. But if that boundary holds, that's when the torture begins for the narcissist. Because a boundary is not just a line, it's a message. It says, you don't own me. You don't control me. I'm not afraid to lose you. And that is the ultimate threat to someone whose entire identity depends on control. The narcissist will lash out. They'll tell you you've changed. They'll say you're selfish, cold, heartless. They'll throw your past kindness back in your face, twist your words, rewrite history. But if the empath stays grounded, keeps the boundary in place, and doesn't waver, that's when they become untouchable. Boundaries create space. And in that space, the narcissist loses access to what they crave most: reaction, emotion, control. That's how the empath starts winning, not with revenge, not with shouting, but with silence, with detachment, with peace. The narcissist cannot survive in peace. They need chaos. They need tension. They need you in fight or flight mode so they can feel superior. But a boundary kills all of that. It says, I'm not engaging, I'm not explaining, I'm not fixing this, I'm protecting my energy now. The more consistent the empath becomes with their boundaries, the more unhinged the narcissist will appear. That's part of the process. The narcissist isn't unraveling because you hurt them. They're unraveling because you're no longer feeding them. They're starving emotionally, psychologically, energetically. And you're no longer on the menu. That's the power of a boundary. It turns the empath from prey to predator, from passive to powerful. Narcissist, they can feel that shift like a burn. There comes a point in the dynamic when the empath stops absorbing and starts reflecting. And when that happens, the narcissist finally meets the one thing they've been running from their entire life: themselves. See, a super empath doesn't just feel deeply, they perceive deeply. They start noticing patterns, inconsistencies, masks slipping. And instead of reacting emotionally like they used to, they begin to mirror the narcissist's behavior, subtly, calmly, and with surgical precision. It's not done out of revenge, it's done out of clarity. Because once the empath sees the narcissist's tactics for what they are, projection, manipulation, gaslighting, they start to reflect those tactics back, and the narcissist is forced to face their own ugly truths. The mirror doesn't lie. When the empath mirrors the narcissist's coldness, they feel it. When the empath uses silence instead of explanation, the narcissist is left with their own emptiness echoing back at them. When the empath stops reacting, stops over-explaining, stops trying to fix the emotional mess, the narcissist is faced with the one thing they fear most: their own lack of depth, their own emotional void, their own irrelevance. Narcissists thrive on being central, important, dominant. So when an empath mirrors their indifference, their apathy, their detachment, it's devastating. What makes this even more painful for the narcissist is that the empath sees them clearly now, not through the fog of love or confusion or guilt, but through the sharp lens of truth. And truth is something narcissists cannot handle. They build their entire identity on illusion, on the image, the performance, the manipulation. But the empath becomes a mirror that shows not the mask, but the face beneath it. The wounded, insecure, hollow self the narcissist has spent a lifetime hiding. And the more the empath reflects, the more the narcissist spirals. They start questioning their control. Their charm doesn't work. Their games fall flat. Their lies get called out, not with anger, but with observation. And that is infinitely more unsettling. This mirror effect is not loud, It's not dramatic. It's not a screaming match. It's quiet, still, unshakable. It's the empath sitting across from the narcissist, meeting them with calm, with neutrality, with emotional intelligence. And that calm, it's deafening. Because now, every manipulative word the narcissist says bounces off and lands right back in their own lap. They start to hear themselves. They start to feel how empty their tactics really are. It's not the empath's job to punish, but by simply existing in awareness, with firm boundaries and a refusal to engage in chaos, they become the consequence. The narcissist begins to self-destruct, not because the empath is attacking them, but because the mirror is too clear. There's no more confusion, no more emotional highs and lows to feed on. There's just truth. And that truth is brutal. The empath doesn't have to lift a finger. They just reflect. And in that reflection, the narcissist sees everything they've tried to bury, and it tortures them. There is nothing more confusing, more disorienting, and more infuriating to a narcissist than an empath who no longer cares, not pretends to not care, actually doesn't care. Because for the narcissist, control isn't always about dominance. It's about emotional reaction. As long as they can provoke a response, they still feel powerful. They live for that tension, that pull, that spark of emotion, whether it's pain, confusion, love, or rage, because it means they still matter. But when the empath reaches a place of emotional detachment, where their inner peace is no longer available for manipulation, the narcissist's entire system begins to collapse. Indifference is not loud. It's not a dramatic exit or a screaming match or a door slammed shut. It's the empath showing up differently. Their energy changes, the emotional tether that once kept them bound to the narcissist, the hope, the need for closure, the urge to be understood disappears. And the narcissist feels it immediately. It's like oxygen being cut off. They'll push buttons harder, recycle old tactics, even feign vulnerability, just to elicit a flicker of the old empathic response. But when there's no reaction, that silence is deafening. It's terrifying, because it means the narcissist has lost their grip. The narcissist knows how to handle rage. They know how to navigate tears, yelling, accusations. That's familiar terrain. But what they can't handle, what they have no defense for, is indifference. Because indifference is not about punishing the narcissist. It's about reclaiming the self. The empath is no longer interested in changing, fixing, or decoding the narcissist. They've realized it's not their job. They've stopped needing validation. They've stopped caring about being seen, heard, or understood by someone who was never capable of doing so in the first place. And that emotional freedom, that is the real revenge. The narcissist will interpret this as cruelty. They'll say you've become cold, heartless, distant. But what they're really experiencing is the loss of control, the loss of the emotional chaos they thrived on. They're witnessing a version of you they don't recognize. Calm, steady, emotionally sovereign. And in that state, the narcissist becomes irrelevant. Not because you're trying to make them feel small, but because they no longer matter the way they used to. And that, more than anything, is what tortures them. Emotional detachment isn't passive. It's power. It's knowing that someone's opinion of you, someone's need for control, someone's manipulation tactics no longer have a seat at the table of your life. The narcissist may try one last Hail Mary, love bombing, fake apologies, a crisis they need help with. But when none of it moves you, that's when they realize the game is over. And not because they lost, but because you stopped playing. A narcissist isn't devastated by your anger. They're devastated by your absence, your silence, your peace. Because that peace means they no longer exist in the space they used to dominate. That's what breaks them. Not revenge, not confrontation, just pure, grounded, untouchable indifference. The moment a super empath redirects their love inward, everything changes, not just in their energy, but in their entire reality. See, empaths are wired to give. They nurture, heal, and pour into others instinctively, often without being asked. And for a narcissist, that's like finding a gold mine of emotional supply. They exploit that giving nature, manipulating it into something transactional. The empath gives and gives and gives, hoping for reciprocity, for recognition, for care. But the narcissist is incapable of returning it, and the empath, stuck in a cycle of overgiving and under-receiving, starts to run on emotional fumes. But then comes the shift, the inner revolution. The day the empath realizes that all the law of attention and validation they've been pouring into someone else, they could be pouring into themselves. And it's not selfish. It's survival. It's sacred. Because once the empath begins to prioritize their own well-being, the narcissist's influence starts to evaporate. That devotion the empath used to give away so easily, it becomes something they protect, something they reclaim. And that reclamation starves the narcissist like nothing else. Self-love disrupts the entire dynamic. It creates new standards, new boundaries, new energy. The empath no longer tolerates breadcrumbs. They no longer accept apologies without changed behavior. They stop negotiating with disrespect. They stop asking people to meet them halfway and start walking away when they don't. And for a narcissist who thrives on being the center of someone else's emotional world, that's catastrophic. They're no longer so the empath orbits around. The empath becomes their own center of gravity. This new energy is magnetic, but not in the way the narcissist remembers. The empath becomes more radiant, more powerful, more whole. And that wholeness is something the narcissist cannot stand because it reminds them of everything they are not. The narcissist craves dependence. They need someone who doubts themselves, who needs to be chosen. But a self-loving empath doesn't need to be chosen. They choose themselves every single time. And that autonomy, that confidence, that grounded self-worth, it's like watching the narcissist's worst nightmare unfold in real time. The narcissist will try to re-enter the picture. They'll use old scripts, old memories, old hooks, but they're speaking a language the empath no longer understands. The empath doesn't fall for it anymore, not because they're cold, but because they're clear. They finally learned that their love is a gift, not a currency, that they are not here to be consumed, that someone else's inability to love them was never a reflection of their worth. And from that truth, they rise. As the narcissist watches the empath pour into themselves, invest in their peace, chase their purpose, protect their space, it becomes obvious the game is over. Because the narcissist was never the source of the empath's power. They were just a detour, a catalyst. The moment the empath starts loving themselves is the moment they become untouchable. And nothing tortures a narcissist more than realizing they no longer hold that kind of power. There is no louder statement, no greater disruption to a narcissist world than the quiet act of walking away. Not storming out, not yelling, not posting revenge online, just gone, detached, done. It's the final act of power, the one they never expect. Because narcissists bank on the idea that the empath will always come back, that the connection is too deep, the empathy too strong, the bond too tangled, to break completely. But when a super empath walks away, it's not impulsive. It's calculated, it's final, and it hits harder than any confrontation ever could. Narcissists see people as extensions of themselves, not as individuals with autonomy. They assume ownership. They rely on the idea that the empath needs closure, needs answers, needs emotional resolution. So when the empath chooses silence instead of chaos, peace instead of pleading, and space instead of explaining, it creates a vacuum. A vacuum where the narcissist once fed off control, reactions, and validation. Now there's just emptiness, and narcissists hate emptiness. It forces them to sit with the one person they've spent their whole life trying to avoid, themselves. What tortures the narcissist isn't just the absence of the empath, it's what the absence represents. It's the realization that they no longer matter in the life of someone they once completely controlled, that they pushed too far, that the game ran too long, that the one person who gave them chance after chance after chance has finally had enough. And the narcissist didn't get a final scene, no big argument, no messy drama, just a door quietly closed that will never open again. For the empath, walking away is the moment all the inner work pays off. It's not about ego, it's about freedom. They're no longer trapped in the cycle of abuse, no longer wasting energy trying to decode someone who thrives on confusion. They don't need revenge. They don't need closure. They've outgrown the entire situation. And that growth, that peace, that silence, that's the real punishment for the narcissist. Because narcissists don't lose people, they just lose access to them. And nothing destroys them more than knowing that access is permanently revoked. The empath doesn't walk away because they stopped caring. They walk away because they finally care about themselves more. They finally recognize that staying in the relationship is a slow death of self-esteem, of sanity, of joy. And they're done sacrificing their light to feed someone else's darkness. So they choose themselves. They choose healing. They choose life without chaos. And they don't look back. The narcissist will try to pull them back in through guilt, through charm, through manufactured crisis. But the empath has reached a place of inner stillness. They see the game clearly now. They know how it starts, how it spins, how it ends. And they choose not to play. That choice, that simple act of walking away, delivers more pain to the narcissist than any outburst ever could, because nothing says you no longer matter louder than silence backed by self-respect.